Hey there, it's Dr. Justin Marchegiani. Welcome to Beyond Wellness Radio, where we provide actionable health information on a week-to-week basis that can help you improve your life. Feel free to head over to justinhealth.com, where we have various opt-in video series on more in-depth health topics such as female hormones, thyroid, and gut health. Also, while you're there, feel free and schedule a consult with myself, Dr. J, and or my colleagues. We're available worldwide to provide natural health support for any of your major health issues. Again, welcome to the podcast and enjoy the show. All right, and we are live. It's Dr. J here in the house. Today we're going to be chatting about nitric oxide and vasodilation and how we can improve oxygenation in our bodies. Evan Brand, how are we doing today, man?
I'm doing really well. Let's talk about the context of this topic. There was a video that you and I watched over the weekend about a doctor up in a New York City ICU unit, and he reported, it was like a 6-minute video. He reported what he was seeing in the ICU and saying that what the official narrative of the coronavirus is saying and what it's causing versus the reality in the ICU looks different. This guy's name here is Dr. Cameron Kyle Seidel, and the title of his video was, Does COVID-19 Really Cause ARDS, which is acute respiratory distress syndrome? And he talks about here that he believes that we are treating the wrong disease, and this is all quoted here, and that we must change what we were doing if we want to save as many lives as possible. And he goes into this video about how what he's seeing that with the ventilators, there's all this talk about ventilators. He sees that it's actually causing more damage because the muscles of these patients he's seeing are actually working perfectly fine. And he's saying what he is seeing does not look like pneumonia at all because the way that the muscle function is looking, it's not pneumonia. And he says that it's something else creating this hypoxia, and he says something along the lines of, it appears that these patients were dropped off at the top of Mount Everest and they had no ability or no time to adjust to the high altitude. So he says this is almost like a high altitude sickness, and therefore the treatment that we are now implementing across the country and across the globe in the ICU is not properly addressing that hypoxia.
Exactly. So hypoxia is basically lower oxygen levels in the blood. Now, people at home can test that by getting a pulse oximeter. You know, once you start dropping below 90, I think a lot of these doctors are more like mid-80s to low 80s is more concerning. And I think you see even some of these people being in the 70s while in the hospital. So there's some ways that we can kind of qualify it and quantify it. With the pulse ox, which is really interesting to know. Now, the question is that ER doctor, his video is quite interesting. We kind of walked away from it where he kind of implied that the ventilators should be used, but they should be used kind of in a different manner. And that was really interesting because he didn't really say how it should be used differently. So if any ER doctors or people who are medical professionals that have experience using vents, I'm just curious, right down below, what kind of different setting options could be used if this is not necessarily an acute respiratory distress issue, this is more of a hypoxia issue. How could a vent be used differently to help that situation? So I'll pose that question for any of our medical allopathic listeners.
Yeah, that would be awesome if we could get some answers, because he didn't provide the answers there. He just said, hey, what we're doing, I think, is actually killing people. He didn't say flat out X equals Y or X causes Y, but basically, long story short, that the ventilators may be resulting in more deaths because there's too much pressure on the lungs because the person is breathing just the way they should, plus the extra pressure of the vent is just too much and it's damaging people. So that's pretty crazy.
And I heard another doctor, an anesthesiologist, chime in and say, what about a hemolung? And a hemolung is interesting because basically it's going in at the carotid artery level, going down to the heart. And a hemolung is used for like lung transplants and heart surgeries. Basically, it takes the blood out of the heart, brings it into this little device, and it reoxygenates it and then brings it back into the heart. So then when it goes up to the left atrium, down to the left ventricle, it's already oxygenated. So that was interesting because then it takes away all of the breathing and the pressure on the lung, and it oxygenates the blood right at the heart level, which I thought was interesting. And maybe that technology, maybe it's too invasive, maybe there's not enough of those devices, and we're already short with the vents, and maybe that's just more of an impossible feat. So anyone that has experience with the hemolung, I'm really curious to know if that could be a good option to decrease the hypoxia as well.
Yep. So all that backstory leads into today's conversation, which is, well, what are things that we can do on our end? Maybe if you would call it preventative. Now, what I say that what we're going to talk about today is something that you would want to implement if you were in an ICU unit and try to save your life by taking extra beet powder, for example. No, that's not what I'm going to say at all. But I'm hoping that just by learning about some of these mechanisms in the body, you can become more educated, and then you can have strategies that you implement on a daily basis to boost yourself up, increase the cell-to-cell communication that happens, the vasodilation that happens, the proper regulation of inflammation that happens, the neurotransmission that happens. There's a lot of stuff that is related to nitric oxide. So let's give some people just a little bit of background on nitric oxide, kind of how it works, and then we'll dive into, what goes wrong if you are even just aging. Just aging alone reduces nitric oxide, we found.
Yeah. And because we're kind of talking about some of the coronavirus stuff, right? And there's some first-line therapy that's really promising, i.e. the hydroxychloroquine, or the chloroquine, which is interesting, and as well as combining it with the azithromycin and the zinc. And if you notice, a lot of people out there aren't talking about the zinc component in this whole thing. So I think that is important. Also, if you're in the hospital, I'm not sure what kind of requests you could make to some of these conventional docs about intravenous nutrients. So if I'm in the hospital, because this is acute, which again, 90% is asymptomatic. So I personally say, if you have a 90% chance of being asymptomatic, well, just be healthy enough and boost your immune system enough now so you're in that asymptomatic camp. But if I'm in the hospital right now, I'm going to be asking for IV vitamin C. I'm going to be asking for IV glutathione, because a lot of these antioxidants are actually shown, Evan, to improve nitric oxide levels, to improve the effects of nitric oxide in the body. And then also we could supplement on vitamin E and, various plant-based bioflavonoids and polyphenols are all going to be great because they're really high in nitric oxide, nitrogen, and they're also really high in a lot of antioxidant compounds. Just kind of as a side note, hey, what kind of requests can you make? The problem is conventional medicine is so one-tracked, it's hard to kind of come in there and do a different standard of care than the conveyor belt standard of care that's at your fingertips.
Right, yeah. When my grandmother was in the hospital for AFib, atrial fibrillation, I spoke with the cardiologist about using motherwort, which is an herb that's great for the heart, and it has some papers on it being shown to help reduce the instance of AFib or the severity of any heart issues. And he just completely, literally rolled his eyes at me and said, "No, Evan, we have our medications in place." And I'm like, yeah, she was on these drugs. She's still in AFib. You're not fixing the issue with your drugs. You're not fixing the root cause. And they just blew me off and fed her lunch, which I told you was a peanut butter sandwich with high fructose corn syrup in the cardiac department.
Yeah, and the problem with AFib, which is like the heart not being in sync with its electrical contractions, a lot of that has to do with like inflammation and high levels of insulin and not having good adequate levels of electrolytes. But a lot of times they'll put you on blood thinners or like a beta blocker or things like that, and that a lot of times can decrease the minerals and actually make the underlying mechanism worse. And then you're kind of more reliant on the drug forever. And that's the problem with a lot of the drugs is the root cause mechanism is really not addressed, and then now the drug is needed more because that underlying root cause is actually made worse.
Yeah, it's crazy. So that's pretty much what's happened, and it's really sad to see because, there's good strategies out there that you can implement, but as you mentioned, it's kind of a one track that you get of treatment, and beyond that, and that's also what this doctor in that video talked about with the virus issue, is that because of the dogma associated with medical doctors, and he is one, that they're not really willing to go outside of the box. So it's sort of just, here's the protocol we're doing, you implement this, but he's saying you put people on the ventilator, 75+% of them are dying. So if you get to that point, it seems that it's just not working, but you can't really switch the protocol because that whoever is above making the decision said that's the protocol.
Exactly. So we're going to be chatting about nitric oxide, which is basically nitrogen oxide and this double bond that kind of combines it. And the 1998 Nobel Prize in Physiology and Medicine was actually kind of looking at nitric oxide's role in helping with cardiovascular disease. And so that's very, very important because we've known for about 20 plus years this is a really powerful compound. And don't confuse it with nitrous oxide. Nitrous oxide is N2O. Both are gases, right? Nitric oxide is going to be the vasodilator. It opens the blood vessels. That's NO, double bond. And 2O is nitrous, and that's the laughing gas that a lot of times you do when you're getting your tooth pulled or drilling a cavity at the dentist office. So don't confuse the two of those. And again, some big building blocks to make nitric oxide are going to be a lot of the plant-based nitrogen compounds. Like Evan mentioned, beetroot powder is very powerful in helping to provide more nitrogen and building blocks. Also, a lot of your green leafy vegetables. So a lot of your carrots or a lot of your celery is going to be really powerful. A lot of your lettuces, spinach, arugula, a lot of your green vegetables, celery, and the beetroot. Those are amazing, amazing compounds to help provide those extra nitrogens to improve nitric oxide levels in the body.
Yeah, and people may say, well, why powder? Why does it have to be a powder? It doesn't. You could eat just straight beets if you want to. But for me, I've had much better benefit, and it's a little easier for me. I don't have to go and cook anything. If I could just open up some organic, non-hybridized beet powder, I'll throw that in with a scoop of my electrolyte formula and drink it down. And these vegetables that are high in nitrates are what allow you to naturally increase the levels. So it works in the erectile dysfunction department as well. Many people have heard of nitric oxide if they've ever had an ED issue, and they try to go on some of these nitric oxide boosters for that issue, and it can help. I don't know if the mechanism of some of the conventional drugs like Viagra work on nitric oxide at all, but I do know that beet powder and other amino acids that you could use, arginine, citrulline, these kind of things, a lot of them are in bodybuilding type formulas, that those can help increase blood flow quite a bit.
Yeah, I know Viagra was originally created, and that was designed to help with angina, with heart pain. And so, yeah, it does. Things like Viagra are going to work on localized release of nitric oxide for sure. Yep, that's definitely a part of the mechanism. Now, the question is, there's nutrients that run that, right? So the problem with the drug, it doesn't provide any nutrient to have that pathway run better. So it's kind of working by overriding underlying mechanisms, right? Underlying mechanisms that are needed. So the problem over time is you tend to have to increase the dose of whatever drug you're using because you aren't fixing the mechanism. That's why adding amino acids like citrulline and arginine are going to be helpful, because those are part of the building blocks to make some of these hormones, or some of these, let's just call them hormone-like peptides, to work in your body. And then also the building blocks in regards to nutrients. So a lot of these green vegetables we talked about. And then the benefit of like a beetroot powder is just the concentration. You can just get a lot more of it in your body versus eating a couple of pounds of beets. You can kind of get it in a way that's more therapeutic and easier to put in like a generalized smoothie, if you will.
Yep. And so why this conversation? Well, because Justin and I did a whole podcast on some of the underlying causes and some of the comorbidities associated with the virus. And if people are ending up in really bad shape, or if it's a fatal case, there's a lot of these comorbidities. Him and I were talking about this before we hit record. Diabetes is massive comorbidity, puts you at increased risk. Also hypertension. And so guess what? Nitric oxide has a role in vasodilation. Therefore, if you have low nitric oxide production, which happens just as you age, just the aging process alone, you have reduced NO, therefore more likely to have hypertension. Hypertension's in the top 5 of the comorbidities of people that are in bad shape with this virus. So if you've got high blood pressure, you are at more increased risk. And we've got a study here, 2014 Journal of Clinical Hypertension, a single administration of an oral active NO supplement decreased blood pressure, improve vascular compliance, and restored endothelial function in patients with hypertension. So are we saying, hey, this is going to get you off the hook? Not necessarily, but to me, it sounds like a really, really good tool to have in the toolbox.
Very interesting. Yep, very interesting. Also, we know that things like low thyroid production, low thyroid hormone, are associated with things like low nitric oxide or low decreased nitric oxide synthase, which is part of the enzyme that makes nitric oxide. And Evan kind of alluded to it earlier. There was an article in the New England Journal of Medicine that came out within the last 2 weeks that looked at a lot of these coronavirus patients up in Seattle area, and they saw almost 60% of them had type 2 diabetes or some kind of pre-diabetes. So now why does this matter? Is high levels of insulin are going to impact your immune cells from gobbling up bad bacteria or viruses, right? We know coronavirus is a virus. And so phagocytosis is the natural process that your lymphocytes or neutrophils or monocytes may engage in to gobble up these viruses. So high levels of blood sugar is going to increase insulin. That's going to make it hard to gobble these critters up. But we know people that consume or that have high levels of insulin, what are they consuming? They're consuming a lot more processed sugar, high fructose corn syrup, all those things. People that are consuming excess fructose, right? High levels of fructose are going to decrease nitric oxide endothelial synthase. That's the enzyme that helps make nitric oxide in your blood vessels. So having high amounts of carbohydrate and lots of processed refined sugar, one, is going to impair your immune system, which is going to make coronavirus a bigger deal, which then will create that hypoxia. But number two, it's going to decrease the enzyme activation of nitric oxide in your body.
Yeah, that's crazy. And when we were talking about the age factor, so if you're older as well, right? Originally, when we were looking at all the stuff from Italy, we were saying, oh, well, this is an issue affecting older people. It's also been found to affect younger people. And everybody says, well, oh my God, now it's the young people affected too. But think about how many young, diabetic, overweight, and obese people we have in America. I mean, we are the most obese country in the world. So I don't think it's fair to look at these headlines and say, oh my God, this guy was 33 years old, because we have the most obesity and diabetes in that age group anywhere. I know India, the diabetes rates are going crazy high there as well, but that's not the point. The point is that when you look at the headline, you see younger people are dying. That's not actually apples to apples. A younger person who is on a paleo template is going to be, in theory, much healthier and less prone to severe complications if they have good blood sugar. And you talked about the amino acids a little bit. So like arginine and citrulline, those are things that you and I use supplementally. What happens is your kidneys, I didn't know this is actually something I learned today. The kidneys are what turn the citrulline into arginine, and then the arginine is the precursor to nitric oxide. And so when you throw extra supplemental amino acids in there, you're just helping this whole pathway run better.
And it's really interesting, right? Because so you're talking about the citrulline gets converted by the kidneys to arginine. Is that correct?
That's right.
And we know that, guess what? Guess where 80% of all kidney disease comes from? It comes from diabetes. So high levels of blood sugar via excess fructose and carbohydrates in our diet, that's going to put a lot of kidney stress. And I'm going to guarantee that with more stress on your kidneys, you're going to have a harder time converting some of those amino acids like the citrulline to arginine. And arginine is going to help make that nitric oxide, which is going to help open up your blood vessels. And so I wouldn't be surprised the more kidney stress you have from excess carbohydrate, sugar / fructose. And I'll go out on a limb, and because we already know the mechanisms there, Evan, we know that issues like mold and heavy metals could also decrease nitric oxide. And I wouldn't be surprised if part of that mechanism is through stress on the kidneys. What do you think?
Oh, it makes total sense. I mean, I had kidney pain. I know that was one of my symptoms when I first got exposed to mold. I thought it was just like adrenal area, but looking back, it makes more sense that it was actually kidney. So I did take some kidney support formulas, astragalus and agaricus mushroom and some other things to help boost kidney function, and the symptoms luckily went away. And also, one of the symptoms of mold exposure is increased urination, especially at night. So we talked to a lot of people that talk about they're up in the middle of the night peeing all the time. That was a mold symptom, and I used to have it. I was up 4 or 5 times a night peeing. I no longer have that issue after detoxing and then supplementing with different nutrients for the kidneys. So yeah, I think you're definitely spot on.
And I'm looking at a couple of studies here. There is a connection between low levels of thyroid hormone and low levels of nitric oxide. And this one study here, it's a review on the topic, but they're definitely talking about more studies on humans are needed. But there's definitely a connection with adding in thyroid hormone and helping to improve nitric oxide levels. So this is kind of like the chicken or the egg thing. So I look at a lot of nitric oxide things are like more downstream, meaning it's like more of an effect than a cause. So we're talking about it here because it plays a really important role with oxygenation and the coronavirus and some of the disease symptoms that may occur. But people that are listening to this that are functional medicine people, we may be inadvertently helping your nitric oxide levels just by moving to a paleo template. By helping you break down your protein, maybe you're getting more citrulline in your diet. By looking at your thyroid, maybe you have an autoimmune thyroid issue, right? Maybe your thyroid is getting destroyed because you're eating a whole bunch of gluten and dairy and processed food, and that's exacerbating your leaky gut and exacerbating your autoimmune issue, which could then be affecting your nitric oxide levels. So a lot of times we may be fixing your nitric oxide by helping your thyroid, or by fixing your gut permeability through a gut infection, or by assessing mold in your home or heavy metals in your mouth or your environment. So, you don't have to break out fancy supplements every time. A lot of times we may be doing this just via diet and other what I call upstream functional medicine system assessment to get to the root cause of the systems upstream, because above, below, inside out, if we deal with the systems up here, the symptoms downstream may improve. And a lot of times that may be through regulating nitric oxide through other upstream things not connected.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, we always talk about how everything's one big spider web and it's all connected. But the more we dive into these things and pull things apart, it really is true. One paper here we had showed that roughly 80% of dietary nitrates come from eating vegetables. And so beets are at the top of the list of being rich in nitrates. You've got the leafy vegetables, as you mentioned, like you've got arugula, charred spinach, you've got broccoli, you've got turnips, cucumbers, carrots, cauliflower. And then also, you mentioned from the protein as well. So grass-fed beef, wild-caught fish, pastured eggs, potentially raw cheeses if you can tolerate them, pumpkin seeds, sunflower seeds, even spirulina. These are all going to be high in arginine, and that's going to help you as well. So this is pretty cool. I mean, it's watermelon was on the list too, which is interesting. Watermelon's really high, apparently in citrulline. So,
and I wouldn't be surprised too if we find a connection with thyroid issues in a lot of the oxygenation thing with the coronavirus. In this one meta-analysis, I think this is powerful because we know nitric oxide and its benefits on cardiovascular disease, right? We could probably ask our friend Dr. Jack Wolfson on that. I know he recommends a lot of nutrients to help improve nitric oxide levels. But in this study right here, the literature discussed in this review, together with our published data and preliminary results related to nitric oxide regulation and hypothyroidism, suggests that nitric oxide levels could be a reliable marker for thyroid dysfunction as well. So we know nitric oxide can contribute to cardiovascular, but they're saying, hey, nitric oxide can also be used to assess thyroid issues, hypothyroid. Now, I'm going to guess it's the low thyroid's probably driving the nitric oxide. I think they have the roles reversed here, but they talk about that that literally giving thyroid hormone, giving LT4, which I think they're referring to that as levothyroxine T4, actually has been used as a therapeutic molecule for improving cardiovascular related disease via thyroid dysfunction. So furthermore, the newly discovered role of thyroid hormone and the effects of LT4 on NO production may have broad implications in cardiovascular disease. So meaning what? Meaning oxygenation and heart health is connected to healthy thyroid. So we know there's a connection between thyroid and nitric oxide, and that's going to help with oxygenation. So if you have oxygen issues and or health issues there, we got to look upstream to make sure the thyroid's not a problem.
It makes sense why we have the most numbers so far. If you're looking at the statistics worldwide, I mean, we have a ton of people, right? We're a very large country compared to some of these other smaller countries that are reporting numbers. So there's a lot of factors, but you look at the health of the U.S., as a general rule, we're not anywhere close to a, quote, native diet. I mean, you look at Japan's numbers, Japan has barely been affected at all based on the stuff I've been seeing. And these are people who, they've got some of the oldest living people on the planet in Japan. They're eating their native diet. I mean, they do a lot of rice, so they probably are higher carbohydrate, but just in general, they're eating real food. They're doing fish quite often. You go down the street anywhere in America, you're going to find a McDonald's, which is going to be hydrogenated oils, massive inflammation. You're going to find high fructose corn syrup in everything. You get the little cinnamon cookies with your kid's Happy Meal. That's pure straight sugar, high fructose corn syrup. So it makes sense, right? When people say, "Oh, well, we could have done this better, or we could have done that better." I mean, look at the template that we started with. Look at America's health template as a whole. We're sick. as a general rule. You've got the little bubbles. Like you go to like a health conference and you'll see everybody's keto and the women look great. And you're like, wow, this is what healthy people could look like. I'm always amazed, aren't you, when you go to health conferences and you look at people, you're just like, these are good looking people. These are healthy looking humans. Wow, what a relief from seeing, if you go to, let's say, a theme park, you're going to see the average American, massively obese, eating ice cream, versus you go to a health conference, you're like, wow, these are what all humans would have looked like a couple hundred years ago, or even my grandparents who were farmers, or my great-grandparents who were farmers. They look like these people.
100%. I've actually noticed the opposite too. Some people at health conferences are really unhealthy because, well, part of it is they're kind of on their health journey themselves, and a lot of times it's all about your starting point. If someone was really overweight, but now they've lost 50 pounds, but they're on the right track. A lot of times people are kind of moving into that field because they're walking the path of the wounded healer.
That's very true.
As Alex Gray says. So
Good
sometimes
point.
Everyone's on a different journey, right? And so I see that too, but yeah, I've seen it both ways for sure. And, one thing I wanted to highlight from you is you talked about citrulline. And there is a couple of studies on low citrulline levels and low citrulline and its effect on nitric oxide. We know that. But one thing they talk about is how people are dying from this coronavirus is typically acute respiratory distress syndrome, right? That's kind of how everything manifests at the end. And they're talking about nitric oxide playing a big role in that. And they talked about that nitric oxide substrate citrulline would be associated with end organ damage. So essentially, lower levels of citrulline increase more acute respiratory distress issues and sepsis and organ damage. So it seems like citrulline is really protective with this end-stage disease failure that you're going to see with these issues.
That is crazy. I wonder if you could get that. I mean, that's the problem is that readily available that you could get it in IV if you're in an urgent situation? Or are you depending on drinking it? What if you're in such bad shape you can't drink an amino acid blend? You know what I mean? It's just tough. Like, how do you implement some of these things?
Well, I mean, you would IV, or worst case, you'd get some type of access port to the stomach or the intestines where you could dump the free form amino acids in that way. I mean, that'd be the biggest thing I would think. I'm not sure what your options are in that kind of a crazy surgical setting.
That's just the problem too, because when you're in that, as that doctor mentioned in the video we talked about in the beginning, is that it's very difficult. And he actually wrote in the comments too as well that he's actually kind of closing up his ICU unit and he's returning just to the emergency room because he says he doesn't have faith anymore in the standard protocol. And he didn't say flat out, but I'm kind of reading in between the lines that he's unable to go off of the protocol and try other things. So that's the problem is, let's just say citrulline and arginine were game changers and beet powder, and they could significantly boost up nitric oxide to really help reduce the severity of this issue. If you bring that up to your doctor, first of all, they may laugh at you. And then secondly, they may say, well, we don't have that. You got beet powder in your pocket, sir? What do you want me to do? They'll probably give you some kind of smart aleck answer like that.
Yep, exactly, 100%. And again, I just think conventional medicine isn't really equipped to add some of these modalities in just because most of their modalities are going to be drug-based.
Well, they don't have it on hand. They don't have a pallet of beet powder in the back of the hospital.
Exactly. And I really like to see, conventional medicine kind of get more hip with functional medicine principles in the emergency setting, right? Because we know a lot of integrative medical docs for chronic disease, they're starting to get hip with functional medicine because they're understanding that they're just treating their patients long-term with drugs, and it's very expensive, right? If you treat a diabetic with just metformin and insulin and all these different things, it's very expensive over 20 years. It's going to cost millions of dollars, but we could actually work on getting to the root issue and fix it with diet and lifestyle and specific supplements. So I wish we could see more of that mindset with the acute palliative care. I think we may see even better improvements.
Yeah, I mean, you and I have several medical doctor friends, some that work in cardiology, some that are emergency room, and I bring these issues up all the time. I say, hey, look, if you've got somebody coming in and they've got maybe some slight elevated blood pressure and they've got major anxiety, what's your all's typical protocol? And it's going to be like a benzodiazepine, like a Xanax. It may be some type of a medication to get the blood pressure down, and then they send them home with like a psychologist or a psychiatrist referral so that they could then go get on an antidepressant. But instead, if I were in charge, if I saw slightly elevated blood pressure, something I thought that nutrients could handle, and there was a panic attack associated with it too, I'd say, okay, well, here's your shot of passion flower, motherwort, theanine. which all will calm you down and simultaneously reduce blood pressure. And then, hey, here's some extra magnesium, here's some extra folate, here's some hawthorn berry, and we're good to go.
100%. I agree. I think those are all good things. People talk about 5G and being a driving factor. It's hard to say. I think the jury's still out on that. I think the first place you want to look for issues with 5G is you're going to see it in professional athletes, right? Professional athletes are going to be in major cities playing. They're going to be playing at the highest level, and they'll be bathed in 5G just based on being in a local metro city area. You're going to see decrease in athletic performance, injuries. So look at the athletes first. I think that'll be the first litmus test of a decrease in physiology and function.
Yeah, and let me add this too, that T-Mobile and Sprint and AT&T and all these people, part of their advertising is they speak about, hey, next time you come to such and such arena, we've equipped it with 5G. So they're actually putting those small cell units all around the actual arena for some reason. So I've seen that as a promotional thing, that those arenas are some of the first places actually to get the new technology. And then, of course, it rolls out into major city hubs and then neighborhoods and then eventually suburbs and on and on.
Yeah, I mean, there's always been 4G for the longest time, so there's going to be some of this stuff. My whole thing is you're probably not going to get away from most of it, so just get healthier. So the healthier you are, the better you'll be able to deal with it. My big concern is going to be like if you're got a 5G tower right on top of your work office or a school that your kid's in. That's kind of my bigger concern, because a lot of these technologies, they're exponentially more harmful the closer you are. So the closer you are to it, more detrimental. So when you're right on top of it, that's where I'm really concerned the most.
Yeah, distance is your friend too. I saw there was a couple of guys, I don't know if this was an official study or just some testing they did out in the field. It was some guys out of New Zealand, I believe, and they found that even just raindrops, for example, reduced the 5G signals by over half, over 50% reduction in signals just based on the rain. And they may have actually been researchers that were helping implement the rollout of this. They were not necessarily anti-5G people, but they were just reporting, hey, look, when a rain shower comes, you're going to lose your signal. And potentially with some of the satellite stuff that's being done, what about cloud cover? Are the clouds? Because I've had family members that have had satellite TV or radio, and they say, look, on a really cloudy day, your signal gets cut down. So I think there's a lot of variables and factors in this, and the rollout might not go as smooth as planned, which if you think that it's going to affect you, that may be good if the rollout is failing and these environmental issues, like even the leaves. Think about the seasonal changes when all the leaves come on the trees. We know there was some, I think it might have been the same guys who did the rain study. They showed that when you tried to blast that type of frequency, because it's a higher frequency, it can't penetrate as deep. So it couldn't penetrate through a tree that had full leaves on versus a tree that had no leaves. It could go, of course, right through it. So just line of sight is very important when it comes to actually getting exposed to these. So if you're kind of living in a rolling hill topography, unless you're on top of the hill and the tower's on top of the hill with you, you're in much better shape. So yeah, I agree with you. It's tough. I mean, I think it'd be really cool if we could just go and point the finger and say, this is it. It's this, but it's too difficult. I think it's going out on a limb right now.
Exactly. I mean, let's look at Italy. They're one of the countries hit the hardest. I think there's a lot of other natural, I call it Occam's razor, right? More probable reasons why Italy got hit really hard, right? So number one, old population, right? 70, 75 plus, lots of comorbidities. That's your biggest risk factor. Number two, they waited a very long time to close down their border, and we know how the social distancing and the quarantine has been effective at decreasing the exposure, right? And then also number three, they just have a lot of Chinese companies actually bought a lot of Italian brands, a lot of big name Italian, clothing brands. And what they did is they basically ship all the Chinese people up there to work in that northern Italy town producing those brands. And they did that to keep the made in Italy tag on a lot of the products. So there's a lot of, I think, over 500,000 Chinese citizens that are legal citizens up in that Italy area. So I think there's a lot of traffic going back and forth. That's probably the bigger variable that I think hit Italy, that outside of a variable of 5G. That's probably more likely of all the different things that's happening there.
That's a trip. That's very interesting. We got two more things we need to talk about before we wrap it up. One thing is exercise in general is, of course, going to boost nitric oxide production. So like interval training, you and I were kind of talking before we hit record about HIIT training, so high intensity interval training, maybe just a quick sprint followed by a walk, or if you have a row machine, a hard row, or if you have a cycle machine, hard biking and then resting. Those things are really, really shown to increase nitric oxide.
Exactly. Some
Dr.
people
Mercola,
go ahead. Yep.
I was just going to say, Dr. Mercola had like a 3-minute nitric oxide video that he promoted where you were doing like a lot of arm exercises and just pretty intense stuff to boost it up. I think it'd be cool to try it and do a nitric oxide test strip on your tongue. That's one way to measure before and after. Probably not the best or most accurate, but that's pretty much what's available. There's not many good ways to test this right now to prove it. Besides feeling your hands. If you got cold hands and feet, like I have, and then you drink beet powder and then your hands warm up, boom, there's your answer. You increase nitric oxide.
Absolutely. Also, things like infrared sauna and or red light therapy can kind of modulate and help improve nitric oxide as well. We've already chatted about citrulline. Citrulline's an amino acid that's a precursor that can be used to help improve nitric oxide, and it can be used to bump arginine levels as well. And someone wrote in on the message, what about arginine and viruses? So yeah, there's some data on arginine feeding herpes and such. I'm not sure if that's the case if you do citrulline, because citrulline is a precursor. So your body may have some modulating mechanisms to prevent arginine from going too high to feed viruses. So I would, if you're going to lean on it and you have a herpes issue, then you may want to just lean more on citrulline and then just work on a lot of the other things. And just keep in mind that the deeper stuff like the thyroid hormone, gut function, pre-diabetes and metabolic syndrome issues with high levels of insulin from high levels of blood sugar. You mentioned some of the exercise, full body, functional movements are going to be powerful. And then also just keeping inflammation levels under control, keeping the gluten and the refined kind of junky dairy and a lot of the refined sugar and processed foods are going to keep inflammation, because inflammation antagonizes nitric oxide, right? Inflammation is going to increase. You're going to have an increase in cytokines and interleukins and prostaglandins like prostaglandin E2. And these things are going to cause more constriction. They're going to cause the vasculature to kind of pinch down tight. And then we're going to have less oxygenation. So in this time of coronavirus being an issue, we really want to improve oxygenation. So these are strategies that we really want to make sure that we're adhering to on the diet side, lifestyle side, and supplement side.
Yeah, I don't want you to skip over it. That was an amazing paper that you found on the far infrared sauna therapy. So I'm just going to kind of quickly read off just a few more things that were in this paper here, and then we'll wrap it up. So there is talk of improving endothelial function, peripheral blood circulation, increasing artery blood flow, alleviating fatigue and pain, reducing blood pressure, promoting capillary dilation. It also goes into heart disease. It goes into reducing cortisol and glucose. So they were saying here that far infrared therapy could help act as sort of an anti-diabetes treatment. It really helps to reduce the blood glucose levels and cortisol overall, therefore improving the ability to respond to insulin. Chronic kidney disease. So let's just say we talked about the kidneys a little bit today. It talks about here too that the function of the kidneys improves with sauna. So, I mean, this is just amazing. I'm not going to say the sauna is the cure for everything, but wow, what a great tool.
Yeah, essentially sweating. I mean, sauna is going to do it a little bit deeper because the near infrared is going to penetrate deeper into the body. So you're going to have a little bit more of that vasodilating effects, but just getting good functional movements in, getting some sweating, getting your body temperature up also is going to be helpful. And then look deeper at the functional medicine principles, thyroid, digestion, and, look at potentially doing things like a lot of these vegetables and upping our diet and a lot of these things to help improve nitric oxide levels in the body.
Absolutely. Well, let's wrap it up. If you want to reach out clinically, Dr. J and I are available. His website is justinhealth.com. You can reach out worldwide. We work FaceTime, Skype, Zoom, phone. We work virtually, so we can send lab tests to your door. You get those back to the lab. We review the results and then make a game plan to get you better. So that's justinhealth.com. My website for me, Evan, is evanbrand.com. And please make sure you're subscribed. We look at our subscribers, and we've got a lot of you that are subscribed, but there's a lot of people that just listen and are not subscribed. So what are you doing with your life? Make sure you're here, because we're trying to tie all the puzzle pieces together. We've covered the diabetes and blood sugar aspect of this thing. We've covered some of the immune support stuff, the cytokine stuff. I mean, we're really trying to just build stack it on. So we're going to continue to do that. So thanks for your support, and we'll be in touch.
Absolutely. And just one last thing to kind of stack on there. I'll reference other podcasts on the topic, but we already highlighted mold as being a potential deeper issue, and then potentially heavy metals as well. And again, I wouldn't recommend going after those right away unless you're in an active moldy home. Then we try to fix that. But you'd want to work with a good practitioner to prioritize these things, because there can be a lot of, let's say, rabbit holes that you can go down. And we always want to work on the order of operations, what's going to give us the best results for the least time and effort.
Yeah, exactly. You don't want to get distracted and put all your money and effort into something that's not the biggest piece of the puzzle. So that's what we do. We try to analyze your case, look at those puzzle pieces, arrange those in not only the correct order, but the order of importance of how big is it going to move the needle. So yeah, you're exactly right.
And anyone that has corona or any other issues, put it down below. I want to know your comments, any feedback that you guys have in regards to improving your nitric oxide levels or some of the strategies that we've already talked about and you've implemented. I want to hear your opinion and your thoughts down below. Really appreciate it. Hey, Evan, it was great chatting with you, man. You have a great day.
You too. Take care.
Stay healthy.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Got a question for Dr. J? Go to BeyondWellnessRadio.com and click the questions button. Then tune in to hear the answer. Also, if you like the show, click below to review us on iTunes. For more Beyond Wellness Radio, go to BeyondWellnessRadio.com.